Hey there, Andrew.
Hey, Luke. So, all right. So we're live. Welcome to the Flow Engineering Show. This is the leading flow engineering segment. I'm the host, Andrew Davis, and co-author of the book Flow Engineering. So, in the leading flow engineering versions of these videos, I'll be interviewing different guests. Today, I've got Luc Guimberteau, who is very early in his career, has been very eclectic and interesting background, and he and I have been working together for off and on for a couple of years, and then more in earnest over the last 6 months. He's helping me launch some of the leading flow engineering programs. But we thought we'd take this opportunity to think about the world from Luke's point of view and the questions that arise for somebody who's early career or just at the cusp of starting a career, and just looking at the world of organizations, management, and so forth. So, Luke, welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Andrew. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to be talking about these sorts of things, especially kind of rep- representing a voice, of a younger generation who maybe has different questions, concerns going into the workplace today, as it's more evolved than it's ever been, whether it be for good or bad.
Fantastic. Yeah. And Luke, do you want to say anything more about yourself, your background, before we dive in?
Yeah, so I just graduated from university in a logistics degree. I'm currently working in a logistics company. I'm just entering the corporate world and the working world really for the first time. And prior to that, I already had many prejudices going into that working world. And now, like that I'm fully in it, like I see a lot of these prejudices that I was scared of kind of going into that. And so that's kind of the stuff that I wanted to touch base on today, was the problems that I, as an individual and maybe as a representative of the youth, kind of face with the working world today. I'll leave it at that for my introduction. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Um, And so, for the context for listeners and so forth, flow engineering explicitly it focuses on a set of exercises to help optimize team performance, but implicitly we're dealing with the whole question of how do you help teams to work together at scale and all of the challenges that arise with organizations at scale. And so, obviously, humans have been doing organizations at scale for thousands of years, but now the speed at which companies arise and grow, the number and diversity of companies in different fields is unprecedented. Also, the scale of coordination, global coordination across the world, across time zones, um, is also unprecedented. And so this and because these corporations are rising with incredible speed, you don't have the same kind of cultural cohesiveness that arise when you have like a city or an army arise with similar people, similar background, and so forth over the course of centuries. You've got everything's happening just very fast. I think it creates a lot of disorientation, a lot of weirdnesses, inefficiencies, and so forth. But Luke, what you mentioned prejudices coming in about the working world. What would you say are some of those prejudices or some of the questions you've got?
Yeah, so like you had mentioned, the access to information and the speed at which we're getting transmitted information has just been increasing like exponentially. And I'm someone who's born into the digital age, so this is all I ever really knew, is kind of, let me grab this meme, this meme, this meme, and then form a worldview around it. And a lot of the memes kind of that have been floating around, memes both meaning ideological kind of ideas and literal internet memes, let's say, a lot of them have been addressing kind of this world of corporate and the negative aspects of it, such as like having a crappy boss, having to show up to do overtime that you're not paid for, having to work weekends, having a lot demanded from you. So that's on one end of the spectrum, is like this villainization of the corporate world. And on the other hand, you have all of these people who are showing the dream of escaping it. So you have all of these people moving to Dubai, starting their own businesses, kind of like showing the what life could be like if you left your 9 to 5. Except my problem isn't really with the I want to go and travel the world. Of course, I want to go and travel the world, but it's not about getting a bunch of money. What I want kind of is a stable life and something where I don't mind going to the same office and doing the same work. But what I do mind is having a good boss, right? And having a good environment to work in. Because I think we can all agree that no matter what environment you're in or whatever working situation you're in, at least you'd like it to be pleasant, right? Whether it be long term, short term, medium term, etc. And so I would say the first thing that I kind of want to touch on is um, all this negativity. Where do you think it comes from? Do you think it's rooted in truth? Do you think a lot of it is kind of blown out of proportion? What sorts of things do you have to say to the people that are glamorizing leaving this life? Yeah.
Sure. So I think, there uh, because of things like, some people are older than others, right? And so with our parents, like when you become a teenager or even a 2-year-old, right, you start pushing back against your parents, and you realize there's a power imbalance because your parents have knowledge you don't have, experience, power, money. They can control your life in different ways and so forth. So you've got that dynamic of like the parent-child thing that is, I think we can say, pretty universal. So as humans have been, you know, for the history of humans, there's been teenagers rebelling and so forth. So I think there's some of that dynamic. They say that our relationships with everybody are sort of framed and set. The context emotionally is set by our relationship with our primary caregiver in the first few years of our life. And so you've got that natural emotional expectation. You've got a certain expectation of someone who's in a position of power or authority. And so, like, and we bring that with us psychologically into the workplace to some degree. And there's this interesting statistic on how most CEOs are significantly taller than the population. And I think there's something about tilting your head back to look up at someone that literally, triggers this sense of like looking up at your parents. This is a person in a position of power. And so parents, it's a hard job. It's very easy to be an unskillful parent. And then the whole history of building organizations, you've had some people who are responsible for giving direction for the history of work, and some people who are responsible for doing the work. And those people also can be very unskillful. There can be power unbalances, there can be threats and so forth. And you take that into the industrialized world, and you start having that at scale, and you start having manager as a formal job and levels of mid managers and middle managers and so forth. And the argument that's put forward in the lean world, lean as a management philosophy, is that a lot of the way modern corporations are structured is based on the model that came out of General Motors, Alfred Sloan, and so forth, which is you've got a small number of thinkers, centrally positioned, smart people in executive and management roles, and all of the line workers doing factory work and so forth are not as experienced, not as intelligent potentially. Their job is just to do what they're told. And so you've got this idea that you're institutionalizing this disparity, this implied disparity in intelligence. You've got a few smart decision makers bossing everybody else around. And so it creates, and I think some of that comes from the natural arrogance of those in executive and management positions, right? Because we all tend to think that we're smarter than everybody else because we do know things that other people don't know. And we also have an insecurity that makes us want to feel like we're smarter than others. And so I think because of our own insecurities, executives and managers and so forth will often project less competence on the people that are working for them. And so it creates, and people sense that. I think workers sense that. They can sniff out that their boss is actually insecure and not as knowledgeable as they make themselves out to be. And so you've got these cultural memes like, what's his name, Michael in The Office, right? The ultimate clown boss. And so it's Michael, right, in the office. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Michael
so
Scott.
Michael Scott, and everybody, he's so embarrassing, right? Because he's so arrogant, but he's so incompetent and is just so, venal and, controlled by his own attachment and so forth. So Michael Scott is a clown. And you've got a lot of these, and people love this, right? People love this because you're making fun of people in positions of power. And I think social media has really also given voice to younger people, to people who don't otherwise have a voice. And so in the like 2020, when you had the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of these movements are giving voice to people who feel like they didn't have a voice, in the workplace. They've been disrespected in the workplace. And they found a lot of people really resonating with that message because there is this power imbalance, a feeling of unfairness, and a recognition that your boss is a bit of a clown. And so it's easy to get the picture from that that's the best, most accurate way of describing the world. And immediately it just looks like, what a ridiculous, horrible, terrible situation. Imagine going to work for Michael Scott. What what a complete what a terrible situation, right? To have to go to a job where Michael Scott is the primary person that you're supposed to report to, take direction from, say yes, sir, to, and is supposed to be your mentor. So what? You become more and more like that as you go up in your career. And it's easy to see like that is just terrible. Like that's just such a, it's so obviously wrong that I can certainly understand that. I think there it is, that helps to feed into this whole generational thing. And I was a part of that, an earlier version of that generation as well, influenced by that very negative view of the role of managers. It's still very prevalent. Dilbert, one of the world's most, is probably the most popular cartoon shared in the workplace, right? Everybody loves, Dilbert against pointy-haired boss. So,
Yeah.
Luke.
Yeah, I definitely think like this fear of having an incompetent boss is a really popular one,
Mhm.
especially like from TV shows like The Office, kind of personal anecdotes here and there about like my boss doesn't even know how to open his email or send a proper email or things like that. And especially for people of my generation who have been born into this digital age, who know a thing or two about computers compared to like these execs who have been in the organization for a long time. They talk really well, but they don't necessarily execute really well. And it's sort of like this hypocrisy of like, how am I supposed to listen to someone who I feel is more incompetent than me?
Mhm.
Even if it's not the case, right? Even if they do have genuine experience, they know what they're doing. They just have some kind of lag because they weren't born into the digital generation. But kind of the image that is given is someone who knows less than me, bosses me around like in a very hierarchical way that I'm not used to very often. And how does one deal with that, according
Right.
to you?
And when you say you're not used to very often, what comes to mind is you wouldn't voluntarily put yourself in a situation where you were bossed around by someone that you didn't respect, or you felt like you were, smarter, more knowledgeable than they are, unless you're in some bind, you're trapped in some situation where you're forced to because you need a job, they gave you a job, you have to. And I'm sure that there's other situations where people can get into similar feelings, like resentment towards a spouse or anywhere where there's a commitment, right? And so, marriage relationships, that's a committed relationship. You make a commitment and then you're like, oh, what did I do? Job, you make a commitment to the job and you're like, oh, what did I do? And so anywhere where we're making a commitment for whatever reason, then it's very easy to feel trapped by that. Now, I would say that, just like I said, there's an insecurity and an arrogance from managers, that makes them want to feel like they're smarter than others. There's also an insecurity and arrogance from everybody. And so
Mhm.
the idea that, because I know I'm a master of my email, and not only, I don't even, I'm way past email, right? I'm various kinds of social media, or, whatever, brain implants, whatever's going to come next. So because you're technologically more advanced, you feel like there's a pride there.
Yeah.
And the pride is to some degree a defensive. Obviously, it's important for us to have confidence in our skills, but it's also a defensive and a self-centered reaction to feel like, I'm, because I'm a master of my craft, master of technology, and so forth, I'm smarter than everybody else, including my boss, right? So you have then a fundamental relationship of disrespect, that the boss is looking at the worker with some disrespect, the worker is looking at the boss with some disrespect. And so in that environment, both parties are overlooking whatever good qualities the other has. And there's, uh, and it's just setting yourself up for a failure to actually collaborate well. And so the reason, so that well, technical skills may be more directly relevant if you're if you're an individual contributor, you're a software developer, something like that, and your managers may not have those technical skills. They're dealing with problems on a whole nother scale, on a whole nother level that you're not having to deal with. You're dealing with all of these social problems, and market problems, and team morale problems, and communicate organizational structure problems, and so forth. So typically, as you go up through the ranks in an organization, it becomes assumed that you're able to handle all of the smaller problems. And so you inherit the bigger and bigger and bigger problems. And so the whole challenge of how to keep an organization afloat, how to help a team to be high performing, these are very, very daunting challenges. And so somebody who has gotten to a higher level in an organization and sustained that position over a period of time and helped the company to thrive in various ways, they are obviously executing some very sophisticated level of performance that is worthy of learning from, definitely worthy of learning from, and admiring and appreciating from the individual contributors and from their peers, right? So that sort of mutual disrespect, or just a failure to appreciate the other, is, I think, the main issue. In the flow engineering book, I included one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is from Peter Drucker, saying that the purpose of an organization is to enable ordinary human beings to do extraordinary things. The purpose of an organization is to enable ordinary human beings to do extraordinary things. And there is something fundamentally humbling about that, because it implies that we have to work together. And it implies that we don't know everything that we need to know to get our job done. And that is why you end up, if you're a solopreneur and you move to Dubai and you start your own company, and that's more possible than ever these days. And there's all these resources to explain how to do that. But even then, the pressure is, or there's a natural wish to then grow it. Then you hire your first person, and you hire a few other people, and you outsource some things. And if you're, the sign that you've done a really good job is you start to grow, and then you become the corporation that nobody else liked, right? That nobody wanted to work for. And you become the boss, and maybe the bad boss. Like a lot of solopreneurs are not necessarily great bosses themselves. And so the whole cycle just will always keep repeating, because it's just part of the system. It's just part of that systemic structure, where the reason that a corporation can pay better than you going off as a solopreneur is because it's pooling the skills of a variety of trained people. You've got skilled marketers and salespeople and customer success and support and engineering and skills that in management, and skills you didn't have and you don't have to have because they're provided by the team. And so there is this fundamental pressure. I think the pressure really is to appreciate the power of collective working together over uh, what is possible for one individual, and that's fundamentally humbling. There's a humbling process of the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really interesting, kind of looking at it from the perspective of we all kind of walk in with kind of this ego, kind of thinking, I know this and this person doesn't know that, therefore they should act like this in relation to me. Whereas I think oftentimes it can kind of go the other way around, where if I change my behavior, I'm hoping that they will be receptive to that and then therefore change their behavior. I think that the leaders are sometimes in a position of extreme authority where they feel like they can kind of treat the people underneath them however they want because of that kind of status that they have. But from what I'm hearing, that's not necessarily the case because, like you said, it kind of all trickles down, right? And if that respect isn't reciprocal, I don't think it is. First of all, it isn't sustainable, and it I don't think it will be able to continue. So that kind of begs the question for you: what does a good leader embody? I think of teachers that I've had, right? People have had good teachers, people have had bad teachers, and oftentimes the teachers that you say are your good ones were the ones that inspired you to do certain things. And I think it's similar in an organization. When you have a good leader, it's someone who inspires you. You want to work for this person. You feel like this person empowers you in what you do. Is that maybe part of what makes a good leader?
I think no question that a really great leader is someone who inspires you to do things you didn't feel you were capable of, encourages you, sees potential in you, has patience even as you're making mistakes and learning, and helps keep you growing in that direction. Um, I would say as you're um, uh, I don't think that it's very likely to vault from being a new manager or new leader to being a great leader or great manager in one step. And so I think all of us have had, if we think about back on our schooling, I'm sure I've had 100 teachers, 150 school teachers, and most of them were forgettable, I think, from my point of view. But there were, a few, maybe five or something like that, that really stood out. They had a great impact. We could say they were great teachers for us. So I would say we should start by having some appreciation for even the teachers who didn't seem that great, in that they at least showed up and did their best according to their skill level, and that helps to give ourselves a little bit of an easy time, that we don't have to immediately be a great leader, a great manager. We can just try to be an adequate manager initially, and then grow our skills and continue trying to look honestly, because it's a skill set. It's a skill set like others, and so great leaders, I think, to some degree, they study, they learn about leadership, they learn about management, they learn about psychology, they learn about sociology, how to inspire people, how to work with people. And it really is a discipline that you, like many others, you start out very, very clumsy at, and then you get better and better and better the more you do it. And we probably all have examples of things where we were terrible at it in the beginning, and then we get better and better. And you have to start normalizing making mistakes and be able to laugh at yourself a little bit and say, wow, that was really not skillful. Because you mentioned examples of making people work unpaid overtime and stay through the work through the weekend, maybe giving them rewards with an occasional pizza party and so forth. It's uh, you know, these are not theoretical situations. These are actual situations. And some of them arise because the manager doesn't necessarily have the power or authority to do something beyond, a pizza party, or they don't know how to reward people beyond that, or they don't know how to work with, budgeting process to get more financial rewards, or because you do get real crunch times that require people to work overtime through the weekend. And um, so it's and American corporations are more, you know, and Indian as well, for example. And some countries have more of a culture of overtime work, whereas Europe has this culture of, work ends at the end of the workday. Absolutely. Um, and that, to some degree, reflects the level of stability and maturity of the society. So I would say that the qualities of a great leader, great manager, it starts with caring for the organization as a whole and thinking beyond just themselves. Because I think the failure mode, if you think about Michael Scott, he's just thinking about himself. He's not thinking about the team. He's just thinking about himself all the time. So thinking about the team, the whole organization, thinking about what's really beneficial for the customers, what's really beneficial for the employees, and at least starting with that motivation in place, and then gradually trying to build the skill and understanding and knowing that you can't do it alone and you have to get desperate enough. There's two extremes you can then fall into. One is the extreme of not leading and not managing and not giving clear direction to your team because you're afraid to come across as a dictator, and then the extreme of being a dictator and just not listening, bossing everybody around, but not being open to their opinion. But there's a balance between these approaches where the leader needs to be pointing everybody. That's the definition of a leader. They have a sense of vision. They have a sense of direction. They are pointing people in a particular direction. Uh, but then they're taking the time to bring people along, try to understand where they are, meet them where they are, help them individually to move in that direction. And that's a tall order. That's a big job, and it's very unlike other big jobs. It's not you can't. This is not just writing software, writing a book, or something that is a body of work you can do alone. You can't do the work of leadership alone. You can only do it in relationship with others, and so it's a very different phenomenon.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think one thing that you touched on is kind of this aspect of authenticity. And like you said, when a manager starts talking about like we're a family here, here's a pizza party, these sorts of things, like the first reaction is not wow, I'm going to get pizza on Friday. It's wow, that was a really pathetic excuse for trying to like stave off the anger that is your team, right? And so I think there might be something there as well in terms of authenticity, because also I see the parallel with the greatest teachers I've had. They've been some of the most authentic people. They're not trying to beat around the bush. They'll tell you how it is, whether that be good or bad. And I think that's like another thing is not necessarily like being a doormat and willing to be walked over. Like we bad things can happen, right? But sa- transmitting those bad things in an authentic way rather than kind of sugarcoating it or trying to like change the way it looks, I think is an important part as well. What would you say about that?
Um, yeah, I agree. There's a power to the authenticity within reason, probably that maybe you know your parents can be humble and honest, but not necessarily tell you all of the gory details of what they're going through, but sort of say, dad's having a tough time at work, this month or whatever. Um, and so similarly, there's probably a sweet spot in terms of authenticity where you're not necessarily revealing every detail that's problematic in a way that would discourage or make people afraid. But I think that there's a fear that I think a lot of it is the managers and leaders dealing with their own fear of not knowing how their team will react, whether the team will like them or not, and so forth. But all of that is mostly self-centered and just saying, hey, we've got. Well, I guess thinking about this a little bit. So let's say the leaders are dealing with a higher level of problem, a bigger level of problem than the individual contributors. Individual contributors are dealing with a particular bug. Managers are dealing with, you know, are we going to lose this customer or not? It's a bigger scale of challenge. And so the job of the managers is not just to pass all of that pain and fear and worry through to their team. The job of the managers is to process that and help the team to understand why what they're doing is important in addressing some bigger challenge, but so that your work matters. We are working on something truly important. We're really trying to help our customers and make the company thrive. Um, but the manager's doing some of the processing. Like there is a path forward. The manager's helping to find that path forward. They're not just conveying their fear and the hopelessness. And so that's, again, that's that higher responsibility that a manager would have, is holding the big challenge, making a preliminary assessment of what we think might be necessary to solve it, explaining some of the reasoning why we think if we do this, this, and this, that'll help us to get out of this difficult situation. And that's why we need everybody to band together, work together. That's why this work is important. But also acknowledging, we don't necessarily know how it's going to pan out. And so not pretending like we have the answers. And that, I think, is definitely in the spirit of lean, is acknowledging the uncertainty. And that's the scientific method, say, acknowledging this is an experiment. We're going to try to do this and see if that addresses the issue. And then that involves the whole team in recognizing that this is an experiment, and avoids one of the biggest failings that can happen, which is, well, I know this is a stupid idea, but my boss told me to do it. And so I'm just going to do this obviously stupid thing because I was told to do it, where it becomes passive aggressive and self-destructive where you follow the letter of your manager's instructions, even when it's obviously harmful, wrong thing to do. And so that's this sort of perverse stuff that can start arising, where we're harming the organization because we're bowing to the power dynamics, but in our heart, we really don't like it. There needs to be a sincerity, a sincere openness to reality. And that, I would say, is part of the authenticity. So anyway, fantastic discussion. Maybe we can look to have a part 2 at some point. I don't want to let this podcast run on too long now, but Luc, really appreciate your candid questions and very thought-provoking. Challenge me to, any last thoughts?
No, just thank you very much. It helped clarify a few things on my mind. Definitely would be nice to have a part 2 to kind of dive deeper into some of these things, maybe in the reverse way. So how can I, as a worker, kind of get in and maybe facilitate this transition, or help my boss facilitate their transition, or anything like that, or maybe be a better employee so that that transition occurs organically. And those are some other maybe topics we could get into later. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk with you openly on this open space, and kind of address some of these questions that have been lurking in my head, and I'm sure the head of many others.
Fantastic, Luc. Thanks so much.